have decided to join us tonight. We've devoured the entire dinner, which is very impressive. Thank you. My name is Laura Good. I'm the Education Manager at the Center for Ocean Solutions. If you've never met me before, I coordinate the Monterey Area Research Institution's Network for Education, otherwise known as Marine. We are a collaboration between the Center and 7 Monterey Bay Area campuses, including Cal State Monterey Bay, Moss Landing Marine Labs, Hopkins Marine Station, Stanford University, the Monterey Institute of International Studies at Monterey, I can say that really quickly, University of California, Santa Cruz, and the Naval Coast Graduate School. And basically what we do is we focus on better preparing future ocean leaders by providing a variety of different professional development opportunities that focus on these leadership skills in the context of ocean work. A lot of you in this audience are from a variety of different disciplines. We have scientists, but we have policymakers or policy-interested folks. We also have people who are interested in conservation work. We have people who are interested in education outreach work. We have people who are interested in many different realms of the ocean field or the ocean sector. And we try to make sure that we get you in the same space as much as we can so you get to interact and meet one another. You are each other's peers of the future. Get to know each other. This is a great experience. For those of you a bit more established in the room, this is a good opportunity to meet some of the other different up-and-coming leaders that are around the area, and hopefully maybe recruit some talents on the way. So, first of all, to get us started, I want to give a big thank you to our 3 liaisons, our student liaisons who organized this event. So stand up, Emma Tom, and Crystal Ng, and Laura Ladd right here. Basically represent Marine at each of our 7 campuses, and we have just recently started a routine where different liaisons take on different large events and rotate around the different campuses. And this is the first one, and they've had the largest turnout in Marine since the last 2 years, which is pretty awesome. Good job, guys. Good job. So on that note, I would like to welcome you again to this event. You'll notice in the back that Kristen over there is taking photographs for us. You'll see at the other side there is Paige, from both of these guys are from Center for Ocean Solutions, who is live tweeting this event. Later on I will write up all the hashtags and things like that that you can look at, but I'm not going to distract you from the panel just yet, because I don't want you looking at your phones. That you can follow on. I also encourage everybody, once they leave the event, that if you haven't done so already, to please sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's the best way to stay in touch with all of our opportunities, but also we try to curate all the other ocean opportunities that are going on in this fabulous region every week. So please do so. And with that, I'm going to let Laurel introduce our panel, and have a great evening.
Hello everybody and welcome. My name is Laurel. I'm the Moss Landing Marine Liaison. And so we really wanted to put together another Women in Ocean Sciences panel, because last semester we did it at Moss Landing and it was a pretty big hit. We got a lot of good feedback. So this time I teamed up with Emma Tonge from MIS and then Crystal Ng from Hopkins Marine Station. We got this together for everyone. So great turnout. This is just a brief schedule for tonight. It's kind of been up for a bit, but we're planning for the discussion to go on from 6:15 to 7:15. Then we'll have a small group discussion over dessert. Yay. And then we'll start a Q&A with our panelists at around 7:30 until about 8 or 8:15. We'll see kind of when people start zoning out and stuff. And then we'll have happy hour networking, so it'll be all good. So before starting, I just wanted to kind of cover the current status of women in the workforce right now. And this information was from the U.S. Department of Labor, looking at women in the labor force from 2014. And so women make up 47% of the total U.S. workforce, but there are wide variations by field. So as you can see, 81% of elementary and middle school teachers are women, but only 50% of post-secondary school teachers are women. So that's anything from college level and above. And then also, 85% of healthcare workers are women, but only 35% of physicians and surgeons are women. So it's kind of an interesting disparity. And then going into topics that are more relevant to our fields. So 43% of management, business, and finance occupations are taken by women, 33% of lawyers, 28% of environmental scientists and geoscientists, and then a combined 0.001% of legislators, marine engineers, naval architects, environmental engineers, and survey researchers. And these are kind of funny. It's some stock photos I found. A couple of women in it, but I was being cute. It's kind of funny. However, only 58% of married women participate in the labor force compared to 74% of married men, and only 26% of women with STEM degrees work in STEM fields. And then, and women earn only 86 cents on the dollar compared to men, which is still a 14% wage gap. And then, continuing, at our marine campuses, I was interested in sort of comparing the percentages of female students to female tenure faculty members. And these are the results that we got from the people I could get data from. I tried to reach out, but it was a bit too late. But yeah, you can sort of see between students and faculty, there's a pretty big drop between like every school. And why is it important to have an equal representation of women in the workforce, and particularly in marine careers? See, diversity is a competitive advantage, and companies with higher proportions of female board members outperform others by 53%. Diversity also helps with complex decision-making and innovation, because people tend to think differently in diverse groups compared to how they think in homogeneous groups. And I think this is particularly important or particularly relevant in marine because we promote so many interdisciplinary ocean fields, from marine science, education, communication, ocean policy and law, resource management, environmental engineering. So we can readily see why diversity and innovation are so important for us to pursue now as well as in the future. So with that, I'll pass it on to Judith Connor. She's going to be our moderator tonight. She is the Director of Information and Technology Dissemination Division in MBARI.
And stripping in front of you. Maybe the panel can come on up and we can introduce ourselves. Good. Lovely. So just to start off, I'm Judith Connor. I moved to Monterey Bay from Berkeley after I finished my PhD there. Did a postdoc at Hopkins, moved on to the job as a writer at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and then just kept moving north until I ended up in Moss Landing. And I've been at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute now for 23 years. Amazing. Before any of you were born.
I'm Sogard. I am a fisheries biologist, and I'm at the NOAA Fisheries Lab in Santa Cruz. I've been there about 13 years. Before that, I was in Newport, Oregon for 10 years, also with NOAA Fisheries. And then before that, I was on the East Coast, and I did my master's and PhD in the East Coast in Florida and then in New Jersey at Rutgers. And I like fish behavior and fish ecology and larval fish stages.
I'm Micheli. I did my undergraduate in Florence, Italy, where I'm from. And then I moved on several times, Australia, North Carolina, Santa Barbara, back to Italy, back and forth for various PhD postdocs and other postdocs. And then I landed here at Hopkins Marine Station 15 years ago. I'm a marine ecologist. My training was actually earlier on in zoology and animal behavior, and then through time I have shifted more and more towards community ecology question, multi-species interaction, multi-species systems interactions, and then more and more to social ecological systems and conservation questions. And that's it for now.
My name is Sarah Reiter. I'm a policy analyst at the Monterey Bay Aquarium. I got my start in the military as an oceanographer and a meteorologist, so I'm trained as a scientist, but as I transitioned out of the military, I realized I was really passionate about environmental issues and the policy perspective in particular. And so I realized that to reach decision makers, I would need to be able to convince them with either money or the law to actually bring the science that I knew and that I cared about to what they care about. And so I went to law school to figure out how to use the law as a tool to help with policy. And some of you may know me from the Marine program. I'm a big fan of the Marine program. I actually interned for the Center for Ocean Solutions when I was in law school, and then came back and did an early career fellowship for 2 years before moving to Monterey.
All right, hi, I'm Carolynn. I work for Gyres, and I'm the environmental program director. And I've worked for Gyres for the last 3 years or so, and I focus on planning the research expeditions that we do annually. And so we bring people like all of you out with us to go across oceans and carry out research and talk about solutions related to plastic pollution that's floating on the surface of our oceans. And I'm also building out an ambassador program where we're taking key volunteers and students and getting them to carry out local campaigns in their communities and on their campuses. So if any of you are interested in carrying out a ban on, or trying to pass a ban on microbeads at your campus, I'm here to talk to you more about that. But I have a background in geology. I went to undergraduate at UC Santa Cruz. I worked for the USGS for a couple years after that, working in a lab doing sediment analysis. And then I got my grad degree at Rhode Island, at the University of Rhode Island, studying coastal management, coastal erosion. And then I moved back to San Francisco because it was way too cold. And I worked for the state of California for the agency that protects San Francisco Bay for about 7 years. And towards the end of that career, that section of my career, I met Anna and Marcus, who run Gyres, and I was like, I'm going on a boat. I need to go on a boat. And so I ended up going on an expedition, and I kind of got hooked and changed my career to focus on plastic. So I'm excited to be here.
If we don't use more slides, I wonder if we can switch off the projector.
We have just a couple of slides again. I urge you all to not focus on the negative. And we're talking about a lot of different focus on solutions rather than getting to the next stage, okay? Make it positive. As positive as you can. So we'll start off, let's see, looking at this graph, which came from Carolynn she was at Yale, and with a team, did a study in 2012 on science faculty's subtle gender biases favor male students. And essentially, they sent identical resumes for a laboratory manager position to 127 schools. And they found overwhelming bias in favor of male applicants. And so in terms of their competence, their hireability, and the faculty's willingness to mentor these applicants. And even when offers were made, there was a significant difference in salary. So something like $26K offered to the females versus 30K.
What companies were these? What schools and companies were these?
Oh, yeah. What was really interesting to me was looking at the faculty was also mixed gender. So different genders, males and females, got these applicants, and they showed the same bias. So even women preferred the male applicants. So with that in mind, I'd like you guys to focus on the first question, and that is what suggestions you might have for helping us overcome this bias in terms of being a potential employee or employer. Take it away.
I can start. I think one of the things that was interesting about the question that was worded, how can we avoid bias? And I want to thank you for putting this on, because I I was under the impression, I must be in my own little bubble, that like we're doing a really good job. I mean, I'm surrounded by women every day. I see women in leadership positions. Things are going well. And then I got this, and this is really startling to me because I hadn't been faced with the actual numbers. I think we can't avoid bias, but I think there are ways for us to address bias. And I think in particular, one specific way that especially early career women can address the bias is in negotiating your salaries. So when you do get to the position of getting that first job offer, force yourself to reach out to your mentors, to watch YouTube videos, to get negotiation books, Bargaining for Advantage, Negotiation Genius, those are two great books, to learn about how to negotiate your offer. And it's always good to do that just for practice, because the first time it feels so uncomfortable because you're so, I mean, you've just gotten this job, this is so great, you want to say yes, but you actually also want to actually advocate for yourself in that way. And by practicing that, it becomes more and more comfortable. And sometimes the way that you can do that, for example, for myself, in negotiating at the Center for Ocean Solutions, the postdoc, the early career fellow positions are standard pay. But I was able to ask about relocation allowance. I was moving from Vermont, and that was something that I decided I should ask about, and I should try. I should just kind of gain the courage to do that, and I did, and it was a hard and awkward experience, but it gave me then, when I moved over to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, more confidence to then talk about the total compensation package. And if they, if your potential employer can't do something with your salary, what are the benefits going to look like? Do they support you taking on, an additional job? I serve as adjunct faculty, and that contributes a significant amount, actually about a quarter of my total compensation per year, and that was part of my negotiation with the aquarium. So I think that's one kind of concrete way that we as women can start to address the bias that we face to, overcome this salary issue, which is just starting.
Great. Carolyn, would you want to weigh in?
Sure. So I worked for a long time for the state agency, ECDC, which is similar to the Coastal Commission up in the Bay. And it was really interesting because I was, first of all, I was 26 when I got the job, but everyone in the upper management, except for one woman, or everyone in upper management was older males. And so that's sort of typical to many of the situations that we're all in, but many of those people are now retiring. And it's really interesting to watch who's filling in those spots. And I just think it's really important for women who are at the same level and in this, in a potential position to take those spots to really fight for it. Because I feel like as women, often our personality, or maybe it's more of how we're told to be kind and to be accommodating, but we're like, oh, it's not that big a deal if I don't get that. But it's important for us to step into those positions and argue and fight to get that position, because, I think women can be in leadership positions and be often much more effective, and we're very good at doing a lot of different things at once, which often not all men are as good at. So, leadership positions are really well in them. So, I don't know if that's that great of advice, but I think we need to really team up and really support each other to take that step to go for those bigger positions.
Thanks. Theo?
So one thing I want to add is when I'm putting together an application, a CD, an application package, to really get feedback from trusted mentors on how to present yourself and how to emphasize achievements. There's a lot, sometimes there's a tendency to be kind of humble, or to even put things in an order where you emphasize the service, for example, that you did, and then you put your publications last, or things like that, where really get some feedback and some advice from peers and mentors on how to really make the strongest possible application and emphasize what you have rightfully achieved. From the employer perspective, I've thought about this a lot, and I see a couple of ways in which we can address these implicit biases that we're all probably affected by these different degrees. And one approach is to be very transparent and upfront about evaluation criteria and lay them out, discuss the weight that, for example, a search committee or an admission committee puts on different criteria, and make sure that we don't twist at the end, the pros and cons and the assets of different people to suit our bias about who's the greatest candidate. So that's one. Another really fundamental aspect, and I've seen this in action, is the composition of committees. If those committees do not reflect diversity to some extent, it's very easy to have a much stronger bias than otherwise. So I think that putting a lot of thought into how the committees are assembled and who's in them is very important for the outcome.
Susan?
Okay, I work for the federal government, and I like to think that we've made a lot of progress, and there's definitely rules in place and salary balance and things like that. So I was actually very surprised to see those figures. There is definitely a more subtle bias. It's not a blatant bias in the government, but it's still there. As far as recommendations, I agree with Fio that you have to present yourself, and there's a balance between sounding really arrogant, and I don't know how many job applications and various things I've seen where students basically said, I'm the greatest thing. That can be a turnoff. So it's definitely a balance between getting everything out there that you've done, but still presenting yourself as somewhat, not modest, but not that sort of arrogance that comes across if you just say I'm the greatest thing ever. So it's definitely something that you want to share with other people and make sure you're getting everything out there that is positive about you, but not doing it. What else can I recommend? I think just maybe sometimes women don't put as much stuff out there. So like a cover letter, if you're applying for a job or a fellowship or a grant or whatever, cover letters are very important. They give you the chance to say a few things that aren't in your CV, and that really helps a lot of times with people. If they see, in the CV you just have a little short line about whatever you've done. In a cover letter you can really go on and expand a little bit more and why that's important. And I think just getting more information out there about yourself is going to be helpful.
Great, thanks very much. One more slide on bias. And this is from another study. This was Carolynn Milkman. She's at the University of Pennsylvania, and her team. And this paper was What Happens Before, a Field Experiment Exploring How Pay and Representation Differentially Shape Bias. So essentially, they sent to the top 259 schools, they sent this request to meet with a professor to 6,500 professors. And what they found was basically the Caucasian males tended to be much more selected for coming in to talk to the professor about potentially being a graduate student or not than either the non-Caucasian males or any of the females. And they actually broke it down by these various departments. But, oh good, then maybe that's good enough to take it out. Bias, from my perspective, I think being able to speak out and be honest when the department you're in or the school you're in, when you see like a search committee where it's all very homogeneous and they're all white males, it's okay to speak up and say, how's a woman going to feel to come in to interview and there's 8 males only talking? And so what we've done with encouragement from Julie Packard, who's the chair of our board, is make sure that if we're looking for an engineer, there are female engineers on the search committee. Same way for any of the major, the PI positions, the scientist positions, or the we're having a lot of the baby boomers retire now. So some of the upper management positions are turning over, and we want to make sure that there's women on those committees so that people feel like they have a vision that they could fit in here. Anyway, onward to the next area where we're talking about mentoring. And there was an article by Danielle Young, who was at Rutgers in 2013, on the influence of female role models on women's attitude towards science and whether they would imagine themselves as a science major based on, did they have a good mentoring experience with, where they could actually see a role model who was female. And so perhaps we can launch into that second question, which is, how have you been a mentor, and how can we be good role models to the next generation of women coming in? So Susan, you want to start this one?
Okay, I feel like I have been a mentor over the years, but maybe not actively seeking it out. It just sort of happens. I've been on several grad student committees, and I've had several women working for me over the years. And I feel like I've made the effort to encourage them as much as possible, not be unfair to any males that work for me, but still do a little bit of promoting of those women that work for me to other people, however I can. Just trying to be supportive and professional and have respect for them and expect respect from them and expect them to do a good job. So I don't think I'm demanding necessarily, but I expect people to work hard, and I expect everybody to kind of have the same level of professionalism that I do. So I expect a lot from people, but then I also try to support them in whatever they're doing and listen to them. Definitely listening to people is a good thing. That's helpful, I think, for them. So sort of general things like that.
Sarah?
I have been mentoring, I'm pretty early in my law and policy career, but I've been mentoring since I was in the military. I mentored my enlisted troops when I was an officer. And I actually had the great pleasure of helping one enlisted young man that was working for me, help him get into the Air Force Academy. He is now a pilot, and that was just such a joy to meet with him and kind of help him navigate the application process and help him believe in himself that he could have a future that he actually thought was that he had closed a door on. So I would say in terms of mentoring now in kind of my newer career, I tend to gravitate more towards mentoring young women, and I have done that through the interns that I've had, and then staying in touch with the interns that I've had after their internships are over. So many of the interns that I've had are in school. They're applying for either other summer jobs or they're applying for their first job out of school, and I really enjoy that process of helping early career women navigate that. It's incredibly difficult, to get that first job and get your foot in the door. And so I just really like helping students do that. It's very close to where I am. I had the great fortune of having wonderful mentors along the way. And I think one of the things that I would say about mentorship is that there is the aspect that for those that are mentoring, it kind of comes to you, which means that if you're looking for mentorship, you have to take the initiative to actually go out and ask for that. You have to take that step. And that's one thing, working with Larry at the Center for Ocean Solutions, towards the end of my fellowship, Larry's more on the science side, but I was involved in writing a paper that really required having his mentorship and his wisdom and guidance. And so kind of also knowing there's a variety of different types of mentors that you can have. Connor's been one of my mentors as well. Just having those role models. I guess the last thing I would say is that when I was in the military, back to one of the quotes, when I was in the military and I was sitting in a classroom, there were no female role models. I could not look at any of my professors or any of the active military officers and say, that is a woman that is captain of the ship. That actually, when I was going through the military, that didn't exist. That's getting better, and I think that's something that's really great about, what we have and trying to gravitate toward that. I mean, if you can find a woman that's in a career that you're interested in a role that you're interested in, invite her out to coffee, ask her how she did it, what her path was, and that can kind of help you navigate that space and make it seem a little more approachable. Carolyn?
Yeah, I have similar advice as you, so I had a mentor, or my boss when I was at USGS when I was just out of undergrad, who, so I was doing a lot of lab analysis and it just wasn't an amazing fit. And I'm assuming she is, a tell, and that she was really encouraging me to reach out to other people in fields of jobs that really interested me. And I feel like that's some of the best advice that I got, as a 21 and 22-year-old, that I actually just, it's kind of nerve-wracking to email some of these big wigs that are running. I remember I went and talked to Caitlin Gaffney, who was at Ocean Conservation, because I'm up here, I can't remember, but Ocean Conservancy at the time, and I sat there and I had, a conversation with her, asking her how she got to where she is. And so it's just reaching out to these people that you think they have an amazing job and thinking about how you could get there. And so I guess in terms of me mentoring, I am in a position now where I work with a lot of different people on these expeditions, and so we bring lots of people of all different ages, ranging from teenagers all the way up to, my mom's age. And so it's this range of people, but it's really interesting because I feel like sometimes obviously people who are younger and in college and just graduating undergraduate, it's much easier to offer advice, but it's actually this networking that continues even to people who are, maybe making a career shift or they're, a professional in just a different field. And so I think it's really about staying, offering up advice and seeking it. Really, like you said, I think it's important to seek out if you want a job in a certain field, just go and figure out what they did to get there and see if, lots of times they'll actually help you. So they'll hook you up with someone else to talk to, and so it's great.
Thank you. Theo?
I want to echo the importance of mentors and of a network. And for example, I was very fortunate to spend almost 3 years in Santa Barbara as a postdoc at the National Center for Ecological Analysis and Synthesis, where I came in contact and collaborated and worked and lived with all sorts of women scientists, from the very youngest to the most senior and established.
Are you looking at me when you
And so the implicit biases that we have. And basically I accumulated such an incredible network of resources and role models, and so to the greatest extent possible, I tried with my students, with my faculty, to connect them and to expose them to different groups. And so that's one thing that I'm a strong believer in, that one of the most useful things that you can do in your career is to identify who these resources are, who are these people that are inspiring or just a support system. So that's very important. One thing that I try not to forget is how important it is sometimes to be encouraging and supportive, and not to take for granted that people know how wonderful they are. We are the worst judges of ourselves in a way, and we're the hardest critics of ourselves. And so, actually there's some of my students here, so I can see over the mixer, but no, just to be encouraging and supportive. I think it's important, because sometimes we forget that we're doing well. No, we're doing very good.
So that's,
sure.
I was just going to say, I had no female mentors when I was going through graduate school or anything, but That doesn't mean that men can't be good mentors, but also if you want somebody to be a mentor and they don't want to mentor you, forget them. And, you know, my best mentors when I was a graduate student were actually older graduate students, and they were extremely helpful. And I ended up, at least when I was doing my master's, I hardly talked to any of the faculty, but I talked to the grad students all the time, and I had this huge network there. And they were the main support system, and they were great. It was both guys and girls. There was, you know, this mix, but it doesn't have to be a senior female person that's your mentor. Just make sure you connect with somebody.
Yeah, I think when I was joining the management team at MBARI, and Marcia McNutt was the executive director, she was very careful not to mentor me, and because there were, you know, 6 of us on the management team, and there were only 2 of us who were female, so she was always very careful to not make it look like we were friends. We weren't friends. But when she did my annual review the first year, she said, I think you need to learn to stand up straight and do the good fight. You can't just give up when somebody wants to take your department in a different direction or whatever. And I responded saying, I'll never be a Klingon. It's not my style, but I will do my best. Do the good fight. And as a mentor, I have 14 staff now, and when I hire people, I ask, where do you want to be in 5 years? How do I help you get there? But when we meet every year, I say, what were you really proud of that you did this year? And what do you want to do next year? Well, I work for you. How do I help you get where you want to be in a year? And sometimes it's training, sometimes they have a conference they really want to go to, sometimes they just want a chance to come by and run ideas by. But I think that kind of mentoring where somebody knows you're open to them and they know it's their job to help you succeed, that's been really the best part of my current job now. So now we're going to, I read a couple of horrible studies about likability. Oh my God. So, can't really, I like thinking back to a year ago when Sarah and I were talking, and she said, you know, when I was in the military, likability was not an issue. It was not on the table. And then she came to the Center for Ocean Solutions. She's surrounded by all these really nice women. I think the important question is not the trade-off between being a good leader and being likable. You know, in your work, you're not always going to be surrounded by friends, and especially if you're in a management position. You know, you're not there to be friends. You're there to be competent, and you can have friends outside. There are people like Sarah that you can meet and, you know, have that kind of relationship outside of your work. But, so forget about the trade-offs, but how can the workplace become more inclusive for career-focused women like us? How about Theo? You can start this time. You get all the first dibs.
So how can the workplace become more inclusive?
How can we be more inclusive of being supportive of people so they're not judged for, are they acting like a man because they have a man's job, and if they're too aggressive, that's not acceptable.
Yes. It's a tough one, and this is actually something that the likability that I struggle a lot with, because I hate not to please. No, my tendency is to get along with everyone. Everyone is happy, it's a happy family, and so I have a horrible time sometimes standing up for something I believe is right and putting my foot down. So that has been sort of a little of a struggle, I have to say, especially in my current position. I have to say, that just to be totally honest, the worst experiences of this kind I've had at Hopkins and not in previous position, where sometimes it's very hard to feel that you can reconcile, friends with everyone and everyone gets along, and then you say something that counters what something just said, and you get in the position that's uncomfortable. So that is it's very uncomfortable for me. One thing that can be done is sometimes very simple ground rules about how conversation can be run. And sometimes we forget that just by saying, okay, you will not interrupt others when they speak, everyone has a right to kind of jump in and say, you can't go on for 20 minutes, that's not, give space to others. All ideas are good when you are in a brainstorming session, and then you can go through and actually decide what needs to be done, but just academics are trained to be critical, sometimes not in the most positive and pleasant way. So there is this culture where you're doing a good job if you find a one weak spot in the argument that someone just put, instead of picking up on something that can be developed. So I wonder if in situations where, especially where they're contentious and there's a lot at stake and decisions need to be made, maybe laying down this ground rule at the beginning might facilitate the contribution of everyone and not feeling that you're crossing a line if you say what you think or not. So that's, I think, one thing that I'm going to start really kind of enforcing and encouraging at Hopkins, just to make sure that it's a comfortable environment and the productive discussions.
Carolynn?
All right, so this is a hard question, but I think for me, a lot of, throughout my career, it's hard to actually get up and often, if someone hasn't, for me, a lot of times the roles have not been completely identified at the beginning of a project. And so I think that's really important to make sure that you talk with your coworkers and your boss and make sure that everyone's, the crowd that you're working with, the group that you're going to be working with, they know what role everybody has, and they know that, that I'm up here and I'm one of the leaders and I'm going to be doing this, so you should, work directly with each of the people who have whatever job they have. But I run into that a lot, actually, throughout my career, where I used to work with a lot of people that were older than me for the state, and they would assume I was an intern or assume I was, a student doing something. And I was like, no, I'm actually going to write your permit, and let's work together on this. And I had to be very likable because it's almost like customer service when you're working with the public in the regulatory world. So that was really challenging for me to be nice when someone's doing kind of strange. But so I'm very good at being likable, and I've been trying to work on being better at really, if someone doesn't properly introduce me or say what I'm there to do, really stand up for myself and say, hey, I'm here to do this, and so you gotta just ask people for the respect that you deserve and that you need, and that it's better to do that in the beginning than after it gets complicated if you wait a while. So I would recommend just making sure that the roles are, I guess, identified and that you really speak up for yourself if you're not getting, the introduction that you need.
Susan?
Okay, well, I've sort of encountered this through my whole career. This image of women that are getting ahead are very aggressive and bossy and pushy. And that's never been my personality. I've always been shy and sort of introverted. And I guess my approach was just to forge ahead and not become like some of those women who had that sort of reputation, and I think I've been successful at still getting through and getting ahead a little bit without having that attitude, and still sticking up for myself but not being loud about it. And it may just be quietly saying, like you were saying, no, I'm not aggressive, no, whatever, but not getting all worked up about it, and just kind of getting things in there when it's possible. I'm still sort of a reserved and quiet person, but I think if you don't have to be loud, and you don't have to always be putting yourself out there as whatever. You can still be kind of working in the background, but getting those statements out there to let people know that you are out there and doing whatever. So.
If I can jump in, this is a very important statement about, that highlights this notion that there is a recipe to go ahead, and that you have to do these things, otherwise you fit in. I think it's wrong, but you need to fight, that you can be yourself and still have a place in science, in this society. We don't have to mimic the last person who we've encountered that we see as successful. It won't work for us probably, or this goes for men and women. So I think it's very important to remember who you are, what makes you happy, how it is that you operate, how it is you interact with others, and really to make sure that there's a space for it in the working environment you're in, rather than having to, I'm going to work, I'm wearing this mask, and then I go home and I take it off and I'm myself again. That wouldn't, I don't think that that's the way to change things. Thank you.
And that's exactly actually what I was thinking about as Susan was talking, is the authenticity. It's so easy to pick up on when you're working in a group with people and they're not being true to their own style and themselves. And it's also so beautiful to work in a collaborative group where everyone is really bringing their own personality and their own style, whether it's reserved or loud, whatever it is, as long as it's authentic, you can tell. And you start to have issues when you're trying to be something you're not, or you're working with people you can tell they're trying to be something they're not, because it gets confusing. So I think, the likability is not, like you said, one recipe. The likability is just being yourself. And I think one thing, I've struggled with this a lot, especially coming out of the military, where you all wear the same uniform. To step in the room as a woman, you're already not going to be liked by certain people that are in the room that don't think women should be in the service. So that wasn't, ever a factor. And to transition into a career, especially in the NGO community, you have a lot of women. You have a lot of women that care about the environment, so the personalities, tend to be maybe a little less assertive. That was hard for me to navigate. And I took a women in leadership workshop at Stanford about 1.5 years ago, and they had kind of a list of the ways that women lose power. And so there are all these different kind of ways that chip away at a woman's ability to have power. And one of them is that women tend to care more than men about being liked. And I don't think it's such a problem that we care about being liked. I think it's a problem when that influences the decisions that we make. So as long as we can kind of stop ourselves before we make a professional decision and ask ourselves, am I doing this because I want people to like me, or am I doing this because this is the right decision based on the facts that I have, based on the situation? Then it becomes a question of respect. And so I think if we strive for respect, we don't have to worry as much about being liked. And at least that's how I'm trying to approach it, is by thinking about, my goal is to be respected, and being respected means to work hard, to be dependable, to be consistent, whatever it is that kind of I respect in other people. And if I can bring that and kind of focus on that less than being liked, it's a little easier.
So as we wrap this up, we'll go around one more time, just looking at, okay, what else can we do? What can we do to make the workplace a more diverse and good experience for all of us? And I would say, if any of you think this has been worthwhile and you would come again, bring a male. Bring a male. Thank you for coming. About the fathers of our future children and other bosses. And males need a chance to hear and express what they're thinking too. Sarah.
What would I say? So one thing that I've been struggling with, or that I'm noticing, is I sense women around me at my level of career. And I sense more women going into graduate school and getting master's degrees. What's concerning is the statistics on STEM, that only 20% of STEM are actually using their STEM degree, or that only 50% of married women are using their degree. So I think that the challenge is, how do we, for the millennial generation that has been raised to think, the millennial females that have been raised to think you can do it all, and as you're kind of coming of age, realizing that you can't actually do it all at one time. So there are different times to do different things, and how do you balance that, and then how do the women that are kind of flooding the workforce at the entry level, how do we get those women to continue to rise to leadership positions if that's something that they desire, you know? And that's another thing that we need to acknowledge, is not everybody wants to be, you know, the head of an organization, and that's actually, we don't want everybody to be the head of an organization, so that would be a really difficult organization to work in. So how do we kind of help women fulfill their professional goals as they're moving towards life, and you're starting to balance more in terms of partners and families and other kind of life requirements? I don't know the answer. I do know that it's helpful to have women to look up to, you know, that you can kind of say, okay, they've done it, you know, they're going in that direction, so there must be a way. But that's just what I'm kind of struggling with right now or wondering about. That's the thing.
Susan?
I guess I think women need to persevere and recognize that you may reach those points where you realize you can't do it all. And there's going to be a lot of stumbling blocks. I think with women there's a confidence issue. A lot of times they don't have the confidence in themselves, and somehow you have to build that up and just sit back and look and see what you've done and say, okay, well, I actually did a pretty good job on that. Even if someone else doesn't say that, you have to find it within yourself and recognize that you do have talents, and that your talents are special, they're different from everyone else's talents, and not depend too much on what other people think or what they say about you, but find it inside of you, and then just stick it out, just keep going, and don't let all of the stumbling blocks get to you. So just gotta keep it going.
Keep it going.
I'm trying. Anche se le tapiro run, when you run. Well, I'm very encouraged by seeing over the 30 years that I've been doing this, a major change. And so the statistics are clear and depressing, but I've gone from being the one token woman in working groups and activities to now, in many situations, now I have a project at Stanford where we're all women. Our group in Baja is majority women. A lot of students I've worked with are now faculty and in leadership position in NGOs and agencies. So it's a major shift. This talent was there before, it's just that I see now the possibility of rising. Now, the perseverance comes where, it's a major ingredient for success. It's probably the most important one, is that determination, that drive. It's very important to understand what one wants, not what your family wants, or not what you and your loved ones really want out of things, because often it's easy to mirror yourself in the perception of others, negatively or positively. And it's good to realize that sometimes others want you to be this achiever, and maybe that's not how you feel comfortable. So I think it's very, very important to know what you want, and then to realize that if you want it, for sure you can have it. This trade-off between family and work, it's not a real one. Men have been doing this for a long time. I think it's becoming more of sometimes of a family issue than a women's issue, of reconciling, caring for elderly parents and children and your work. But I think that more and more is becoming of a family issue rather than a women issue. So I don't think that this planning that sometimes women do, and I've gone through many of these conversations, trying to have children and where to move, that it's done before any of this even is relevant. I think it's a major obstacle. And sometimes if you want something, just kind of throw your heart behind the wall, and go after it. And a lot of things, maybe this is an Italian expression. A lot of things, you find solutions, we're problem solvers. As a species, we've been problem solvers forever, and so I think that's a real, that to me is one of the most important things to realize, that we tend to see the problems in what our neighbors encountered and what your mother told you. You know, we absorb all these experiences, but we have to find the role. That's
Nice.
I think one thing that we talked about it a bit, but I think celebrating the positions that many women have already is really important. So I work for 5 Gyres. There's 6 of us on the staff, and 5 are women. So we have a very woman-run organization. But Anna Cummins is our executive director, and she's obviously a woman. But really celebrating people who are higher up in these different positions, and not just your own network. So I think it's crossing, and this is a great group because you guys cross between many different degrees and schools. But I think having more exposure for women who have really high up and extremely cool jobs, and really highlighting that in media and not main media, and also just throughout schools and to other young people. And I think often women are a bit more shy and less likely to brag about what they've done. And I think we need to encourage people, or maybe interview our coworkers and brag for them, and so that you can really get the word out what people are doing. Because I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities of really sharing information about what women are doing.
So any additions before we turn this back over to Laurel and Laura?
I had one other
Great.
thing that I needed to talk about that I just wanted that I had also been thinking about, and that was balancing, and this has to do with mentorship. It was a question about mentorship, and I was thinking about how could we be mentors to women. And I think one other thing that I would say is that I have found female mentors to be most effective for me as a mentee when they showed their vulnerabilities as well as celebrated their successes and their accomplishments. And so I think we do get this advice to really make sure we celebrate, and I think women need to do a better job of kind of marketing ourselves and claiming the value that we add. But I think that we also, to the next generation of women, can be approachable. And I think it's really important, for me, when I'm looking at a woman that I find really impressive, if she was to kind of tell that one story where she made a mistake or she wasn't perfect, it would be like, oh, okay, well that's so good to hear, because that means if I fail in this small way, it's not the end of the world. And so I think that's kind of one thing that I like to share, especially when I feel comfortable. So sometimes it's not comfortable to do so, but I like to share, with people, especially like law students. I almost failed one of my first law courses, and I told that to a class full of first-year law students, and I was on campus the next year, and I had 2 students come up to me at separate times and say, "Thank you so much for telling us I almost failed that class, because I was almost failing, and I was actually going to drop out of law school if you had said," it's like, you have no idea the impact that you can have when you also kind of talk about, like, not celebrating your failures, but also just
Thank you. And Sarah, I'm imperfect. Laura?
So I believe that Laurel has some questions that you guys put in your registration that I think Laurel's going to pose to the panel before we break into our small group discussion. So these are things that were generated, ideas that were generated before you even arrived here, before you were influenced by what you've heard today.
But yeah, so we wanted to ask you guys what questions you wanted to ask the panelists, just to kind of gauge where the interest was. And it seems like we covered a good amount of just topics about bias and leadership positions. So we're going to have our bigger question panel after our small group discussion. But we're going to open it with this one question, but since we're a little early, I'll just kind of open with it now. And the question was, we often talk about doors that are closed to us because of our gender. Are there times that you felt that being female has made opportunities for you? And is it best to utilize those opportunities?
I'll take that one. So I'm much older than all of you, and when I was a grad student, I I was pretty much the only female when I went to scientific meetings and things like that. And it actually, I think, did open opportunities for me because people remembered me. Instead of the thousands of white males that were in the cohort. And it was great because I was kind of shy and, I wasn't really out there as much as maybe some of the guys, but I would go to the next meeting 6 months later, a year later, and somebody would remember me. Great. Sometimes it does open opportunities, and if that's the case, just take advantage of it. And the other thing is that, through my career, especially kind of early on, I know that I was invited to sit on a panel or be on some kind of team because they needed a woman, and they were instead of being insulted by that, I could have been very insulted. So you only invited me because I'm a female. I was like, great, okay, and I'll just go and I'll do a bang-up job, and then they'll realize, well, they should be, not even concerned with whether I was a female or not. It's just what can I contribute to this particular event. So I think if things come up like that, don't be insulted. Just take advantage of it and show them what a good job you can do. So.
There are also some fellowship programs and opportunities that are dedicated to promoting diversity, and so there are only for women, so those definitely
I faced that in the military, and I had certain opportunities that I actually had male classmates come up to me and say, well, you just got that because they needed a girl. And that, discounts the prerequisite skills that you need to have to even apply for, right? So I think to the extent that we can challenge that notion, I think that's helpful. We just had Tim Wise come and talk at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and he was raised in a predominantly African-American community, and he's white, and he's written some really incredible books on diversity and inclusion, and he came and talked about diversity and inclusion. There was a really thought-provoking conversation, and one of the things that he talked about was when you have that token person, that psychologists have done research on the psychology of that token person. So if you are the token female, you bring to that kind of the pressure of representing all of woman, kind. That's just kind of not reasonable. So I think that's another thing to be aware of as we may be in situations where we are representing, all women, that you're representing yourself. You're representing yourself, you're representing the skills that you bring to the table, and that will, come through.
All right, well, so my first 5 Gyres expedition was in 2011, and I think I was still at a different job, but I was taking time off to do this, and I got invited to go and be the research assistant on the next expedition. So it was like, I was in January, so it was in July, and I was just beside myself that they wanted me to come. But I think part of the reason, there's a lot of people that want to go on these expeditions. It's very, it's a free ride on an amazing boat across the ocean, and it's not for everyone, but it is scary in some cases, and challenging for everyone. But I think what I brought to the table in that case was a little bit more of like connecting with people. And so I think, not that all men don't, but it was like I was almost like the camp counselor on the boat. And so I feel that, sometimes I'm like, why did I get chosen to go do this? And so it was interesting, and I think it was helpful to have another woman on the boat. I mean, for the most part, on a sailboat, it's mostly guys, who are all can lift really heavy things, and it's like sometimes you get really, nervous that I'm not gonna be able to keep up or have the same strength or do that. I'm sure that's the same for a lot of research, and I've experienced that in the past. So I've always prepared myself for being as fit as possible while I'm going on those expeditions. And I got made fun of this last time because I was taking this, boot camp class to get ready for an expedition, and they were like, well, we had Jack Johnson on our last expedition, so people were thinking that I was prepping myself. No, I want to be as strong as I can, and I want to be able to be part and not feel like, I can't do this. And so I think that's something that empowers myself, is like I get prepared and I know that I can do this. And I think having a woman and lots of women on the boat is really on our thing, especially, I'm sure it's the same on big research expeditions on boats where there's lots and lots of people. It's like women, it is important to have people to connect to, and often women are those people, so.
Can you give us another one?
Sort of pertaining to what you're talking about working on in the field, but have you noticed that there's like different expectations that come to you because of your gender, or I guess any like projects or any position that you guys are doing?
But field work, no, scuba diving, boats, heavy weights is very culture dependent. But in Europe and in Mexico, people would rush, oh no, that's too heavy for you, no, please sit down. So it's very and that does affect a little bit of your leadership role. I've learned to kind of deal with it and try to gauge in what situation it's okay to say, no, I can do this, and when it's fine to say, yes, you do it fine. Which is, I think it's much less in the United States. I've always felt that there's much less, to the point of rudeness sometimes. I was a graduate student. I was crossing the yard with an outboard engine. Usually those are carried by two people. I couldn't find anyone, so I was carrying. And there were people standing around like, okay. Promise, you deal with it. So I think it's that I find that the expectation is very culture dependent and it's context dependent.
Yeah, I would agree. I've been on research expeditions where I'm the only woman on the boat on the ship. And I think the hardest was the Turkish National Research Vessel, where we're getting ready to go diving, and all the men stop and watch me. It was horrible. And then when we all got out of the water, they all were offered a beer, and I wasn't. Not that I didn't like beer, but you know.
So I don't see this at all in my job because I fly desk and a little mouse clicker. So there isn't, the kind of the physical activity aspect of isn't there, and so I don't face that, and I don't face that in terms of somebody running a meeting. I don't know how atypical that is because Monterey Bay Aquarium has significant female leadership. Julie Packard's and Pia Vernon. I mean, you have an awesome rock star group of females leading the organization. So I think the culture is really healthy in that way. I absolutely faced it when I was in the military, and I think the one thing that I would say about that, if you are in or thinking about going into a field where there is that kind of more physical activity, that emphasis is one thing that when I look back, I wish hadn't been part of my experience, and I wish hadn't been part of the other young women's experience, is that our thought process was always, I just need to be at least better than one other girl. Because if I'm not the last girl, then I'm not the last girl. And so it was kind of like, just to survive, I'm stepping on or trying not to be that person. And looking back on that with more maturity and kind of being out of that, I'm like, gosh, that's really, that gets to kind of women not being able to help each other and being too competitive with one another and kind of stepping on each other to get ahead. And I would just kind of think about that, and I try and think about that, in terms of being ambitious and competitive and everything, is how do you do that in a way that's healthy when you're kind of staying in your own lane? Like this is my lane. I don't have to sabotage everyone else to be able to be successful.
I think often when I'm in a position where I am, leading up a group of people to do something, I think it's really helpful if you're in the position you can do this, is actually evenly let people have different opportunities. And it's very basic and sort of, what you do when you're in elementary school, but it's sometimes in, the research expeditions that we lead up are people who don't know how to sail and who are there to learn how to do the science, and so they're not necessarily people who have already done a lot of science. And so if you just let it naturally go, it will be those people that are they're louder and they're just more upfront, and often, a lot of times men will be in that position. And so if you just let it go, the guys are going to do all the sailing and do all the trawling. So it's, whenever I am running the show, I'm, picking out different people to do it. So I think it's up to women who are in sort of the leadership position to also take advantage of that and really highlight and make sure that everyone has an opportunity if they want it. I mean, maybe people don't always want it as well. So you got to really pay attention to what people want too. But yeah, I've been in both situations where you're like, oh, what about us? So it's really got to, help each other.
I think this is one thing that's really changed over my career. And when I was younger, the guys would, like you said, oh, let me take care of that, I can pick that up, whatever. And I think it's really changed, and I don't really even notice it at our lab now. The women that we have working in our lab do everything, and if there is something that they're not physically capable of doing, they'll just say, hey, I need to handle this. And it's sort of not even, I don't even think it's an issue anymore. It's really changed, which is great. And we just kind of expect women to do what they can do, and if they can't, they're going to ask for help, and we'll just go from there. So I don't even see it as an issue.
Okay, Mas.
I think it might be a good time to actually break up for our groups.
Oh, okay. So have you been in a situation where you're in a conversation or a work thing, and you notice the conversation has a lot of bias in it or gender-related comments that you're uncomfortable with? How do you handle those? How do you decide when it's time to say something or when you're just going to let this go? Yeah.
That happens to me all the time when I was a grad student in Miami. I worked with, everybody else in the group was male. And I remember just things like driving to a dive site or whatever, and this is what happened back in the day. They would make comments about a woman walking on the street, just all kinds of stuff like that. And mostly I just had to ignore them and just tune it out. But once in a while they would just say something, and then they would realize, oh, we're being rude, aren't we? But, it did happen all the time, and that's much different now. I don't really encounter that anymore, but it was really annoying. And I had to just suck it up, and most of the time I would just ignore it.
Yeah, I had that experience when I came to MBARI. When the ship goes out and they're launching the remotely operated vehicle, they're taping everything, all the conversations that are going on in the control room. So you can hear, you can hear a scientist say, oh my God, that's a new species, or I've never seen a squid do that. But you hear a lot of blonde jokes. A lot. You don't anymore. Because I would say, I can't wait to tell that blonde joke to Julie Packard. I bet
Well, yes, I agree that there's been a trend for situations like this to be very uncommon. And for me, improvement is relative to my baseline in Italy when I was an undergraduate there. It was just basically hunting season with professors, persecuting students in various ways, more or less open. The word harassment didn't even exist. No one thought it was the wrong thing to do. And so, that kind of environment to what we have now here, it's light years. So, because of this, I often, maybe I wonder, and I think that maybe this is not a good thing, but I'm a little desensitized maybe to the language. I've just, to put it plainly, I've been used to so much worse that I very rarely encounter situations where I'm not so comfortable. It's a little more subtle. Sometimes there's an implication about sort of assumptions made about what your role is, about keeping good notes and making sure that everyone is in time. So that I find more annoying in a way, the way there's some assumptions about what my role is in a certain situation. And so I correct that usually.
I think that's a really interesting point. It brings up kind of the challenge of women and their organization and how that can be added value to a team, but also seen as administrative, and so how do you balance that? But in terms of this specific question, I've had, not in my environmental career, I really haven't faced it, and actually I would say, to kind of counter what Fio has said, if anything, I'm more sensitive to it now because I don't hear it very often. So when I do hear it, it really kind of startles me because I'm not used to it anymore. But I heard it every day when I was in the military, and I think in terms of if you are faced with a situation where that does happen, you really do have to think about whether it's something that you feel is important to say something about. So I'll just give kind of an anecdotal story. When I was in college, I was at the Naval Academy and I was on the honor staff. And we had an honor conference at the Coast Guard Academy, and West Point's honor staff came, Coast Guard, Air Force Academy, Naval Academy. We were all there for this summit on honor, and the honor codes at the academies are a really big deal because it's part of kind of the military code of ethic. And we had done a full day of workshops, and then we were at this pub, for lack of a better word, in the Coast Guard, where the Coast Guard Academy is. And the West Point, he was a senior, and he was the chair, president, whatever the title was. He was in charge of West Point's honor staff. And he raised his glass to all of us that were sitting there, and I was the only woman. I was the only woman on any honor staff. And he raised his glass to all of us and he said a toast. And he said, to honor, to offer, if you can't come in her, come on her. And of course, it was like, oh, a toast. And everyone had their glasses raised. And I kept my glass where it was. I didn't drink. I eventually put it down. The guys that I went to school with that knew me well, they didn't drink to that, they didn't toast to that, and it was a 3-day workshop, and that was the first day. And so I went back to my room, and I was like, that really, I get shaky talking about it now. That really bothered me, and I was thinking, this is 2004. So we're going to Iraq, we're going to Afghanistan, we're going to war. He is graduating from the West Point, he is going to be leading troops in, overseas, and he's going to be leading troops, and he was infantry, so I knew that's what he was going to be doing, and I was like, I just couldn't have lived with myself if I hadn't said something to him. And I actually, because of the way the system is set up, I actually could have gotten kicked out of West Point, because it was that. At the time, Air Force Academy had just had a rape scandal. It was really kind of a heightened no tolerance policy. And I was like, okay, well, here are my options. I can say nothing and kind of feel like this for the rest of my life. I can, bring it forward as a formal complaint and get him kicked out. Or I can say something to him individually. And I chose to say something to him individually because at the time it was also, you face certain ramifications for, getting him kicked out. Because then I was the girl that had, gotten him kicked out. And what did that really do for females at the academies? And so the second day, I went up to him afterwards and I said, can I talk to you? Can I pull you aside for a second? I was so nervous. And I said, you made that joke last night and that really offended me. And he said, well, the Merchant Marine girl didn't have a problem with it when I told her earlier in the evening. And I said, I was offended by that. And you're going to be in Iraq, you're going to be in Afghanistan, you're going to have troops, and those troops have mothers, they have daughters, they have sisters, and that's really offensive, and I think you need to think twice about the things that you say and the way that you say them. And he was like, okay, well, he was dismissive towards me, and I said, listen, I could have brought this up as a formal complaint, and I felt like it was better for me to come to you and tell you in this way so that you could reflect upon this and learn from this. Now, whether he did learn, Probably not. But I know for myself, that I was able to sleep that night saying, okay, that kind of reached the level of like, I need to say something about this. There were other times where it's like, whatever. It's not a battle I was gonna fight, but that one was like, that just kind of got me. And so I said something, and it was really scary, but I was proud of myself. So I would say if you do kind of face a situation like that, like, put on your big girl pants and go for it. And who cares if you're shaking? Who cares, if you start crying? Like, just do it.
Yeah.
Experiences you would have
follow that. So I think actually speaking up for yourself is really important, and in many situations when you're in the field, I feel like it's sort of this more casual environment where you are acting, you're professional, but you're also acting as friends, and you're on these expeditions for multiple nights and days, so you're into each other's comfort zones and personal space, and so you're getting to know these people pretty well, sometimes too well, and so it's really important if something is bugging you, whether it's, lots of different things, but specifically if, people are saying things that aren't appropriate, you really need to stick up for yourself, and if you don't feel comfortable doing that, there's always somebody else that you can talk to, and I think in most situations that it can be anonymous, and I think that it's, you don't want to go to bed feeling horrible and not, running that, what have I done over and over, so you really need to find somebody. And most of us are lucky enough to work where I'm sure there's systems in place now, but it's the smaller comments for me that are like the hard ones to deal with, that are sort of in these casual environments, and I find that I just, I'll just straight up say, that's inappropriate to say. So I think it's good to say it if you feel comfortable, but if not, you can find someone else to say it for you.
Another question?
Big time. So, a lot of you have talked a lot about standing up for yourself and not being too humble about the accomplishments that you have. But we also talked a little bit about the whole likability and being viewed as aggressive in leadership roles, etc. So I was hoping that you'd maybe be able to speak a little bit more to, like, as you're going out and applying for jobs, as women, being able to say what your accomplishments are without being viewed as being aggressive, because inherently there's that double standard, right? Like if I go out and I say the exact same thing, the exact same accomplishments, with the exact same assertion that Pat does, sorry Pat, that I'm going to be viewed as bossy and aggressive and over-assertive, but all things equal, Pat will just be viewed as Pat. So how do you walk that line between standing up for yourself and speaking to your accomplishments without, and trying not to worry about that like aggressive title, but in reality that aggressive title does get put on women that stand up for themselves. So how do you play that?
I just have to say that, we have some scientist positions open, and so males and females are coming in. Give a great seminar. Practice until you are just really confident that you are going to do the best job you can. And then relax and enjoy. I mean, you can make people so glad they came to your seminar, and they'll want to talk to you about everything afterwards. How about you guys?
Good advice. I think also have a sense of humor. Don't be too uptight about everything, and throw a joke in there. And when you're talking to people, you want to present yourself as having all these accomplishments, but don't be too strident or too serious about it. If you can just be relaxed and comfortable and look confident, even if you're not feeling confident, but just have a sense of humor about it.
I think it's also very important, not to the seminar, to develop your scientific identity and really find what knowledge. You introduce yourself and you say, I work with larval fish, or interest. No, find what it is that interests you and present it, and really develop that thing that is yours, and it's your own research, and you're proud of it, and then it will come naturally, I think, to brag about it because you're excited, not because you impose yourself. So I think it really comes hand in hand with your passion, and you're pursuing certain research questions, and really wanting to share that with others. So that, I think, is a big part of showing what you know about because you like it, you're proud of it. I think that's important. And then don't worry too much about how you come across to others. That's the other thing that you learn in time, and I wish I had learned it earlier in my life, much earlier, because you worry about what everyone thinks, and it really is the most unproductive thing in the world. You just not go for it. Often we're a little weird. Everyone else is. So I think it's important to just not worry too much about how you come across.
I think one way in particular that women can claim their success is by working on your story and thinking about your story, especially as you're about to go into job interviews. So there are a lot of ways that I could talk about myself. I could start by saying, my name is Sarah Reiter, and I have a bachelor's in science in oceanography from the Naval Academy, a master's in science from the College of Charleston, and a law degree from Vermont Law School, and I engaged in my postdoctoral studies at Stanford University. And that does not come across the same way as saying, I started my career as a scientist, but I'm really passionate about environmental issues, and I found that by really engaging decision makers, I needed to do this. So there's a way to kind of weave in your accomplishments, but in a way that's your own story and part of your own path. And for me, my accomplishments are a result of the experiences that were kind of what was driving my curiosity, like Fio was saying. And so if you can kind of figure out how to tell your story, it will be so much more comfortable to also bring in kind of the not the statistics, but like the actual accomplishments in doing so. And that's, you can practice that by kind of working on the bio, right? But, we have, the bios that were sent out for all of us is kind of like practice, what would you want your bio to look like, and what would you want it to read like, and, what drives you? Why are you pursuing this particular career, and then weave in the accomplishments.
All right, well, I agree. Actually, my sister, she runs an organization and they do storytelling workshops. So this is a question that a lot of people struggle with, and it's really trying to sell yourself or explain yourself, I guess is another way, but in a way that's interesting to others and highlights the important bits of who you are. And so I think practicing and really practicing and really thinking about what makes you different and what you're most proud of and sort of how you got there. And maybe it's really early in your career, but you can still think, why am I where I am, and why am I wanting to do what I want to do, and really sort of figure out a good way to explain something unique. But I think it's really important to be proud of what you're doing, and I think we should all be proud of, or we should try to be proud of what we're doing. And I think that really comes across in job interviews when you're doing something that you're passionate about. It's much easier also to talk about things, I think, when you can figure out a way to talk about it in a way that you'd like to talk about it, or you feel good about it. So.
Another question?
So we talked a lot about different skills that can be practiced and developed, like communication, negotiation, leadership. And I think you guys have all presented really fantastic stories of some really tough situations where it took a lot of courage to practice those skills in real situations. But these are also skills that we can practice in more safe environments, and a lot of institutions have workshops that negotiation, a storytelling workshop, or negotiation books, or Rare Voices and Influence program. Can you guys talk a little bit about what those resources are for Theo, particularly at Stanford, since Stanford's too, he said he's a Marine. Marine obviously is one of them, but what are kind of experiences that you personally draw from to be able to practice these skills in a safer environment?
Yes, I've had two very important experiences in this context. One is this Faculty Voices of Influence program that Stanford runs for faculty and for graduate students now, so there are two different programs, and we had workshops on stories, body language and posture, and so there was a theater professor who came in and talked about the importance of posture and body language and how women often sit like this. With these different things where you were leadership position and then we were switching roles and all this very interesting. We talked about, they actually presented all these results of implicit biases, similar studies where there were musicians hired for orchestra and they found that if there was a curtain and you couldn't see the gender of the musician, there was similar rates of hiring, but otherwise it was about very interesting. So just having the information sometimes is very, very important, and then being able to practice in that setting. So there are programs like this in many different institutions, and they're incredibly valuable, very, very valuable, both in terms of the knowledge that you get from it, the practicing skills in a safer environment, and also because of the network of people that then you develop in fields distant from yours and all that. So that's, and then the other one was this training that I did through the Outdoor Leadership program that also has graduate program and mid-career, so I did the career one, and there was also communication and all sorts of skills that we get to practice, and that I still use almost daily, those insights, because they then apply to proposals, to how you present yourself. So this, I think, maybe seeking out these opportunities is really, it's an important part of the professional development. I got a lot out of it.
Marine is a good place to do that, by the way. Yeah, I was gonna say Marine has served for me since 2010. Has served as a great, place to work on professional development. I teach dispute resolution, which focuses on negotiation theories. So I tend to like kind of the negotiation books and watching negotiation YouTube videos and practicing doing the simulations, the role playing. And if I actually feel like I'm going to be facing a negotiation that's going to be really uncomfortable for me or awkward, I'll force someone in my family or my husband to negotiate with me beforehand so I can actually say the words, because I can, I do a great job writing it out, but it's another thing to practice in that environment. So relying kind of on friends and family, and then also a support network of other, other young male and female colleagues. So that's another thing that I've kind of used to practice as well, because we understand that it's a safe space and encourage each other.
I guess for me, I wish this group was around when I was in college. It would have been great to have more resources, but really lucky to have this, so I'm taking advantage of it. But for me, public speaking has always been something that I've not loved. So really putting yourself in an opportunity where you have to talk to people. So I remember early on, I used to make myself, when I go to a conference or somewhere where you feel maybe that there's people that are experts about you, I would set a deal with myself. I'm going to talk to 3 people at this event. And so that really does help you, those little things. It helps you get the confidence that you need to do really simple tasks. But sometimes it's much easier to just turn around and be like, all right, went here, did it, didn't talk to anyone, but I still win it. But, so it's good to really set some goals for yourself as well. And it is hard to follow up goals like that sometimes, but That's something that I've done, I think personally, but I have made myself go to certain, commit to different things that I know are going to be really challenging. Like if you have to get up and give a presentation or facilitate a group or, do something that's out of your comfort zone, it's good to sign yourself up for that. Give the presentation at a conference or, prep yourself for it, be ready for it, but sign up for it.
Presentations are still hard for me, and I've been doing them for 35 years. But I think if you do practice it, another thing I would suggest is get it ready sooner rather than later, so you can give it to your colleagues or your friend or whoever, and just practice it a little bit and get some feedback and use that feedback and revise it. I haven't had the opportunity to do some of the workshops that you talked about, which sounds great. I wish I had, but yeah, definitely practice it. Like everyone said, give yourself, I'm going to talk to 3 people at this conference, and I'm going to track down this person that I want to meet, and no matter what it takes, I'm going to meet them and talk to them. And just give yourself those kind of goals. And even though it's something that might be out of your comfort zone, do it. But definitely the practicing of the presentations, and again with the job seeking, all those things, the more you do it, it does get a little bit easier, and you'll also recognize that you're always going to be nervous, so now, it still happens, but you just do it. You just have to get up there and do it, and it's still going to be awkward and difficult at times, but you know that's coming, and it doesn't really bother me anymore. I just know I'm going to be nervous.
Another question?
I had one more thing on that I had forgotten from a leadership workshop that I had taken, and they talked about, especially in if you're in a meeting that you wouldn't necessarily, maybe you're shy or you wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable kind of leaning in and being part of it, they suggest recruiting an ally. So recruit someone else that's like part of a workshop or part of that, because then any meeting that you're in can become some sort of safe zone, because you at least have kind of one other person that's there looking out for you. And so actually that's occurring right now with my intern. She is a little more introverted, and one of her goals is to speak up in meetings, and because I know that, I can be her ally when she, when we're having a policy meeting and she wants to, okay, now I'm gonna talk, she has that support mechanism, so you can build that in as well.
Nice. There's one up here, one back there. At the front.
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak about the experiences that you might have had where something that someone did, either mentor or peer, did or said that made you feel welcome or supported as a woman in your field.
Surely you felt welcome somewhere.
Yes, I've been very lucky to have encountered these people many, many times. And I've been incredible. And these are now, I have to say, I had great female role model, but I also had some really great colleagues who said, no, yes, you need to be in this project because you always bring in a different perspective. Or no, just really encouraging things, like you're the hardest working person I've ever met. No, we need you. And so that it kind of validated my style, my contribution. It made me feel, yes, I belong here. Because sometimes there's this feeling of not really belonging, or being sort of an imposter sometimes, no, when you are, and no, I found them, no, and I can name them, lots of people that I can think of that at the right time said that one thing that made me feel, yes, yes, it's true, I am hardworking, yes, no, this is nice, no, I didn't see that I was bringing something new, but it's nice to hear. So I think that's why I feel it's so important sometimes, that encouragement that we forget to give sometimes is very important, because at the right time it can make the difference between someone pursuing a career, a project, a goal, and giving up. No, it's, yeah, I think there are a lot of nice people in our field, despite of this, and a lot of support, I think.
I think it's different in different fields, and I think in my field in fish ecology, basically, people are very supportive of each other, and do give you good feedback and good comments, and sometimes you don't realize that it is nice to hear once in a while when somebody says, that's super. Yes, now I get some positive feedback on it. That's kind of nice. So and that does make you realize, well, you need to do that to people too. Not just say to yourself, oh, that was great. Go and tell them. They get that feedback too.
It's important. We don't get that from the HE index or from the other. No, there are all these metrics, but it's much more important that someone with respect and your honor says, this is good work. That has counted more than anything as my diploma.
Good work, Theo.
So I took one of those personality tests at some point and realized through the test that I really like gold stars. I love gold stars. I thrive on and will not perform well unless I get gold stars. I mean, Mom on video, if you're going to watch this YouTube, I think it's because that was one of my incentives growing up. You got a sticker, you got a gold star, you did something good. So anyways, I know that about myself. I may over-communicate that to my friends. See, Lucy knows that I like gold stars. So if, I'm going along and it's been a long time, Lucy knows, maybe gold star. But I think the important thing to remember is also training myself not to take for granted when someone else deserves that gold star, or I think, oh man, that was really incredible. But then I don't actually follow up and either verbalize that or send an email. So actually last week I was working with one of my colleagues from Center for Ocean Solutions, Lisa Wedding. We're working on a paper together, and she just always provides the most incredible, insightful, constructive feedback. And it was just such a joy to sit down with her for 2 hours and go over this manuscript and feel like the paper was bringing our manuscript to another level, and it was positive, but it was also growing, and it was just so incredible. And I forced myself after that experience to go back to my computer and shoot her an email and say, I just want you to know that this is just amazing to be able to have this experience, aside from the manuscript, aside from anything else, to actually be able to do that. And so I think it's kind of training ourselves to go from thinking it to actually, saying something about it.
Yeah, so at Gyres, our staff meetings now start out with gold star. What are you thankful for, and who do you want to thank? So you go around and we give each other compliments, or isn't that compliments deserved? So it's thanking someone for doing something that was helpful. So it's really celebrating successes and being supportive of each other. But I think that's something that we can really carry on with us in a meeting or in we're doing anything. So you can start out by saying this worked really well. I'm right with you on liking the gold stars. I've actually asked for it at work. I'm like, I need to know that this grant report that I just submitted, did you like it or did you not? I just, usually, it's fine if they're not saying anything and you tell yourself that over and over, but I kind of want to get more feedback on, was it good? How can I improve it? So you can always ask, especially if you, when you don't get a job or something like that, you can improve yourself, but improve upon situations by asking for some feedback. And it's, most people get it and it's constructive. So I think finding more information is always good. But thanking people, I really, the small emails are so impactful for people. When you spend hours planning something and nobody says anything, you're like, well, did anyone notice how much work you put in? So.
Another question?
I think this should be our last one.
This will be our last one.
No pressure.
So sort of going over the statistics where we saw the disparity between students and faculty, there's a huge percentage of drop off. I guess it kind of brought up the question of are there just less women applying or are they not getting hired? But if it's the former, they're just not applying, I guess it kind of comes to, as someone brought up, those are kind of our logical flop peers. How, I guess, have you guys, have you worked with your like significant other on like how like family sacrifices will have to be made and how would that affect your career and sort of how you like reach that like equality?
Pick a good man.
Or woman. Yes.
I had children so late that basically I'm not a good example. Because I got a faculty job, I got tenure and then I ended with this because just the way things worked in my life, not by choice. So I think that it is a real issue because the critical years are usually when you're applying for jobs and postdocs, and so that's having a great partner who supports you or a great support system of any kind is probably, I know that in my case, the reason I can go all over the world, and I just came back from Israel, and I go in the field in Baja California, is because my partner, Judith Connor of Hopkins station, is a true partner in this. We have 2 children, one of us is going, the other one is taking care of things, and so it hasn't been, for me, that's why maybe I come from a different experience, but it hasn't been a trade-off between what I wanted to do and having a family because we're in this together. I know lots of different situations where there's a friend of mine in Canada who's a single parent. She has a support system. She was just in Puerto Rico with me at a few meetings. Her kids were with friends, and that's why I say it works out. It's not, it shouldn't be an obstacle, and I think we need to say that more, and we need to have more examples of things working out and not having to give up anything. The worst mistake I think that one can make is to give up something so important as your personal life, your personal goals, because they perceive that you have to make a choice. I think it's a false choice. No, it's not a choice. If you are choosing between having a family and having a job, no one will give up anything. So I think it's, we need to really to promote more examples of things working out rather than more difficulties. But I come from this experience where, of course, I did it all wrong.
One of my major professor, a bunch of us in graduate school went to him and said, when is the right time to have a kid if you want a kid? And he said, there is no good time, but he also said it's not worth it anyway, they're a pain.
That's the kind of advice, because I got plenty of that kind of advice earlier on. But that's what we need to counter. No? Where it's very discouraging, then you will not be able to go to the field, you will not be able to travel, there will be no miss all these opportunities. It's simply not true.
There's a lot of examples. I know women right now that are pregnant and have kids that are very active, and they just figure it out somehow. But
it takes
there are lots of examples, and for the federal government, of course, there's lots of opportunity, maternity leave or whatever. So there shouldn't be a bias against that.
It was funny because I was working for the state of California, which has great benefits, great maternity leave. And when I made the decision to quit that job and kind of take a risk on whether or not I could get a full-time job at Gyres, that was the question that people would say to me, or they would ask me, why are you leaving this job? What are you doing to have a kid? And at the time I was like, well, I don't have a boyfriend. Just right now I don't have a kid, but good point. This is great, and that's, I think, for me, a lot of it has been, when are you having a kid? It's like more putting me in this time frame, because I just turned 37, and I'm supposed to have a kid already, if I can have a kid. And people are, even at jobs, I mean, it was just so interesting to see this response, and it was like, it would never come up for a man, and I was just, I just ignored it, and I had to answer that question quite a bit. But, so I kind of had the opposite, where people are kind of forcing it. They're like, get back to your state job and have a baby.
So I had the great fortune of spending my third year of law school, my second year of law school, single, convinced I was going to DC to work. I was going to go to DC to work, one, because that's where a lot of environmental work is, and two, that's where a lot of dateable men are. I'm not going to find a guy in Vermont, I'm going to DC. I ended up, and I also had in my mind, I'm a planner, and I also kind of compartmentalized, and I was thinking like things happen in a certain order. So I was like, I'm not, like, I have another year in Vermont, but I'm not going to meet anybody here, and frankly, I don't want to date anyone, because then it's going to be long distance, and we're going to break up. I'm going to get to DC, and then I'm going to meet a man, I'm going to get a job, it's going to, like, awesome. And I met my husband in Vermont. We met, and the first night I met him, just because this is my personality, and I figured I'd show him like crazy a little early. So I said, I just need to let you know, I'm probably not going to stay here. I'm going to DC for the summer. I'm actually going to end up in DC. I'm going to move, so if you want to date, that's what it is. And he was like, all right, that's but okay. We ended up, the next spring, we got married. I mean, we were engaged, and then I was like married, and in law school, we're married to like a guy from Vermont. It was like all that I couldn't conceive what I couldn't do it. And so I think that's kind of what Fio's getting at, is like to kind of preemptively plan what you can't even, it's beyond like your wildest dreams what could happen. And so you kind of have to take whatever decision is right before you at that point, you know? For you, it was like, at this point in my life, this is my next opportunity, and is this what I want right now? And I think kind of that's where you are. And then once you have that partner, and I agree that I think it's important to kind of think about the type of partner you want, whether you want to be in a power couple relationship and how that could influence, your professional career, and think about whether that's not something you want. And I mean, you're going to date different people, and I do think that's, something to think about, and that at different times, you may prioritize different things. So for me, for my job at the aquarium, part of my move to the aquarium was, I've been pretty transient. I've been doing, 2-year stints since I graduated from college, and I so desperately wanted to have a job where I could stop looking for a job for a second. Because some of my criteria were, I want to be in Monterey, I want to do ocean work, I want it to be a permanent job with benefits. That's where I was at that point when I made that decision. I may be, and you may be, at different points. And so just make the decisions that are right for where you are, not what you think you're going to be.
Well, thank you, panel. You've been fabulous and wonderful. You all are so smart and lovely and young, and the world is your oyster.